My name is Bill Lee, and I live in Waterville, and I've been part of the church for, I'm guessing, 15 years, or pretty close to that.
Okay. All right. Well, my first question is, where have you lived and where have you gone in your life?
Well, I've always lived in Maine. I grew up in Augusta, went to school at Gorham for 4 years where I lived in town. I didn't live in the dorm. Then to Van Buren for a few years to teach, and back to Brunswick for 2 years of graduate school, and then another year while I was looking around for a job and so on, and then to Pittsfield for 30 plus years. I've been in Waterville for about close to 20 years now.
Okay. All right. Tell me about your favorite teacher or a mentor who had a positive influence on you.
Well, I worked with a lot of pretty powerful folks who offered a lot. Not so much in here's how you do this kind of thing, but just hanging out with them and watching how they worked and interacting with them, which I did a lot. A lot of really bright folks. And as far as teachers go, I always had a cordial relationship with teachers, but never really a close one. I was an okay student. Would much rather have been somewhere else, but it was, like I said, it was cordial. But there is one teacher, and I'd not thought about her for a long time, but she was a home ec teacher at Coney when I was there. And it was sort of a glancing blow relationship. I didn't have her for home ec because boys didn't do that at the time. And we also had double sessions, so there really wasn't much time in the day. But she was a homeroom teacher. And I think I had her for one of those, you fill in some 3 credit hours every now and then classes. But she was one of the old school, big old girls with paisley dresses. And we've all had them when we were kids, or at least my generation did. But over time, it came to be known that she and her husband had taken in kids that didn't have any other place to go. And that was before we had shelters and things like that, and before this sort of thing was widely known as a problem. She would spot kids who weren't well-dressed or well-fed and make sure they got dressed and got fed and gave them a place to live on a lot of occasions. Sometimes for a short period of time, and other times she was sort of like the adopted aunt that kids kept coming back to after graduation and after the next graduation and so on. And I remember thinking at the time, wow, this is really special.
Wow.
And that's always hung with me.
Yeah. Wow. Has there been a turning point in your life? Can you tell me about it?
Well, I think everybody that gets into their 70s has had some. My father died when I was 16, so I suppose that's a turning point, but I don't know really what it was like because, that was my experience. And I was an only child, so there wasn't a lot of reflecting to be done around that. It was just carry on. That was the way things were done then. A lesson that I learned that I never forgot, and I think of it fairly often even today. My father was a kid who his father was an alcoholic and could be pretty rough, and he had to make his own way pretty much support himself from the time he was a teenager. So he had his own business, and I was riding with him to Augusta from where we lived. And at that point, Lippman Poultry had a chicken processing plant between where we lived and town. And when we went by, it must have been coffee break because there was a lunch wagon out front, and there were probably 50 people standing around in bloody aprons and hats, smoking cigarettes. And of course, there were feathers all over the place, and the place smelled bad. And I said, boy, I would never work there. And my father was really mad. He said, listen, there may come a time in your life when you will be grateful for a job that's maybe not that good. He said, so remember that. And I always did. And over the years, I've done things like washed cars for those people that work there, and bailed out manholes with 5-gallon pails, and done things like that. And I think about that fairly often.
What kind of work or volunteering have you done, or do you do now?
Well, historically, I lived in Pittsfield for over 30 years, and I was really active in Boy Scouts and at the volunteer rope tow, the Pinnacle, and involved in the church pretty heavily. In fact, as like all the churches we know about, as it went from a couple hundred people, at least over 100 on a pretty regular basis, down to much smaller. There are fewer people to do the jobs that need to be done. And so that ended up being pretty much a part-time job for a long time. So I sort of joke about it. When you're willing to work for nothing, folks will find things for you to do. And they always have. And you know what that's like.
Yeah. What about here in Waterville?
I only do two things regularly. One is working for the food bank, usually 2 days a week, occasionally with another day thrown in. And it's not a big time commitment thing. It's 3 or 4 hours each time I go in. But that's kind of fun. And that is what passes for social life in my life. Working around a bunch of folks, many of whom were well educated, dedicated volunteers, and that's the fun part. It's really fulfilling because I keep going back to I read it somewhere. It's good to feed people, and it is. And I also volunteer some in the church, not an awful lot, but I try to hold up my end anyway.
And you were at the food bank for a number of years, I think, right here in Waterville.
Yeah, I'm not good at timelines, Sally, but I think it's about 10 years now.
Okay, yeah, that's a lot of people.
Yeah, I didn't think it was that long. And then we were comparing notes with somebody there one day, and he said, referencing an operation that he had, and I thought that was 2 years ago. And he said, well, that was 7 years ago. So, yeah, we've been together a while.
Yeah. Why do you go to church?
Well, I think there's a higher power, and I think the higher power deserves to be acknowledged and worshipped. And yeah, I probably didn't put that very well. I fancy myself as a Christian. Perhaps other folks wouldn't. Sometimes it's hard to measure up. And I've had my doubts at times, and I come and go. Right now, I'm sort of in the stage that I heard a Buddhist refer to as many names, one God. I'm certainly not looking at anybody else's faith and saying it doesn't count. Nor am I looking at my own and say this is the only path. But it's important to me to worship. Church is an important part of my life, and so that's why I'm there, and we'll plan to continue.
Okay. Why did you choose this congregation in particular? How did you end up here?
Well, it was sort of an accident. Like I said, I'd been very active in the Pittsfield church and determined not to do that again, because that was a lot of time. And with shrinking roles, how do you balance the budget and do all those things? And you're familiar with that. So when I came to Waterville, I knew one thing, that I wanted to go to a Christian church and a friend of mine was a Unitarian, and that didn't quite measure up. So I narrowed it initially by churches that had a service relatively early in the morning. And for me, earlier is better. But both the Methodist Church and the Congregational Church had services at 8:30, and so I would go to one week and then another week. And finally, I came face to face with David and Alice Anderman, whom I'd met casually at different conference things. And David looked at me and had that, He says, "I know you." And I said, "Oh." In fact, just a few weeks after that, I was invited to coffee or lemonade or something like that at your house, Sally.
Okay.
And had the Methodist minister said, "Sign here," or something like that, I would have been over there. but I knew that the congregational, and I don't have the right words to describe it. That was a good place for me to be, and it still is. I feel very comfortable with their teachings and practices, and so I'm very content there. Happy accident. But
Okay.
when I did look around, I said, "Gee, there aren't that many people here." Uh-oh.
I remember that day actually because we were all in the living room, and I had a couple of dogs at the time, and they had their little place that they went when company came. But you started to sit down, and I said, "Don't sit there. That's the dog's chair."
I
And then
remember
I felt
that.
terrible because I was just didn't want you to get dog hair on you.
I thought I was about to be attacked, and I felt grateful.
Well, so anyway,
But
no.
that was my formal introduction to the church, and well, you can see the results.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks for having me over.
You're very welcome. Thanks for putting up with the dog chair. Uh, do you have a spiritual practice that you observe now? If so, is it something your family also practiced when you were growing up?
We didn't have a family practice when I was growing up. My father was not going to church Episcopalian. He made sure that my mother and I could always get to church, and so I was brought up a Catholic. And by the time I'd worked my way through my teen years, I wanted a real change. I was not comfortable with that at all. And so, other than and I did attend parochial. Uh, they don't call it Sunday school, catechism classes,
Mhm.
but we never really adopted a standard practice. And since then, grace at meals has come and gone, and currently gone. And I tried to be prayerful and thankful, and sometimes meditative, which you could say is or is not a religious practice, but try to maintain the idea of gratitude. And I think for me, that will do for right now.
Mhm.
As I think you do, I regularly read John Swanson's 300 words column. That's normally the first thing I read in the morning, and I'm a compulsive reader, so I read quite a few things. And
Mhm.
that's I know John and know his wife and family, and so that gets me off to a good start of the day.
Mhm. Okay. What can the congregation do for you, Bill?
Well, I've been made to feel welcome and respected, and uh, well beyond the tolerated part. And so I'm happy with that if that continues. I haven't used the term church family for quite a while because I felt that way about my church family in Pittsfield, which went back 30 years. Uh, and this is a different group, although no less welcoming. Uh, but I think the term church family is important, and it's important to me, and I feel a warmth and a closeness to the folks that are there on a regular basis. And to me, that's great.
Okay. Tell us about a time you experienced love.
I thought about that a lot, and you could, we might as well concede that you cheated and sent me the questions ahead of time. So I did give them some thought. I don't have them here. I lost them somewhere, but I had them. Um, I don't know that I've ever felt a time that I didn't feel loved. So it's a little hard to address that. Um, Maybe a month or two after a divorce, that's kind of a downtime, and a lot of folks have shared that experience or felt that experience that we have in common. But in my first marriage, I felt loved up to a certain point. That's how those things go. And I'm very grateful for Joanne, whom you know, and her whole family that have just accepted me. And the kids, I'm still Bill even to the grandchildren, and not grandpa or something like that. But I that's fine, and I don't see that as a lack of acceptance. But I'm how to put this? Feel very comfortable there and respected and loved, and so that's just kind of a general thing. It's not a specific point in time, but it's to the point where I feel good about that.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for this talk, Bill.
You're
I've
welcome,
enjoyed
Sally.
it. Okay.